Welcome back to the deep dive. We have a stack of research on the desk today that is, well, it is going to make you look in the mirror a little differently, maybe a lot differently.
I would actually say it is going to make you look through the mirror.
Through it.
Yeah, like beyond the glass and beyond the skin and right into the machinery of who you are.
Right. Because usually when we talk about identity, who we are or whether we feel like a man or a woman or even who we fall in love with, we talk about it like it is software. We
Exactly.
treat it like a feeling or a psychological state, a soulful intuition, and sometimes even a political stance.
We treat it like an opinion, like something malleable, something that exists just in the mind, which we tend to imagine as this vague cloud floating above our heads.
But the materials we are diving into today, specifically the heavy-hitting work of neurobiologists D.F. Schwab and Simon LeVay, alongside some absolutely mind-bending evolutionary biology, they suggest something totally different.
They suggest it is not software at all. It is hardware. We are talking about wires and cells and fibers and nuclei. We are stripping away the psychology and looking strictly at the anatomy.
And the thing that hooked me, the thing I kept circling in the notes with a big red pen, is the sheer scale of this.
Oh, yeah, the size of it.
Right. We are talking about a specific part of the brain that is no bigger than a single grain of rice.
A tiny, tiny speck, just a crumb of tissue, really.
And the claim here, the central mystery we are unpacking for you today, is that this speck, this grain of rice, might have more say in who you are than your chromosomes, your hormones, or even what is between your legs.
That is the core tension. It is the intuition versus the anatomy. We are looking at the biological hardwiring of gender and sexuality inside the human brain.
So our mission today is to explore this idea that it is not you, it is biology.
Right.
We are unpacking the physical evidence that suggests gender identity and sexual orientation are rooted in specific neural structures.
And this is the part that gets really wild later on. We're going to trace that wiring back a billion years. A billion years to the very invention of the male sex by ancient females.
It is quite the journey.
It really is. We are going from the microscope to the time machine, essentially.
But before we get to the neurons in the time machines, we have to define the stakes here. We have to understand what this feels like for the people living it.
Yes, because the source material highlights some incredibly intense reports from transsexual individuals.
And to be clear, we aren't talking about adults who suddenly decided to make a lifestyle change. We are talking about children.
Very young children.
Yeah.
The reports mention kids as young as 6 years old.
That stopped me in my tracks when I read it. 6. I mean, at 6, I was barely figuring out how to tie my shoes.
Right.
I certainly wasn't contemplating my existence or my gender. But these reports describe a deep, unwavering intuition of being in the wrong body.
And that word intuition is key here. It isn't a wish. It isn't a fantasy or a game of pretend. It is a profound sense of displacement.
The sources use this haunting analogy. They describe the body as a mask.
A mask you cannot take off.
That is terrifying.
Imagine if you woke up tomorrow fully, your consciousness, your memories, your entire sense of self, but you were in a body that everyone treated as the opposite sex.
It would be a nightmare.
You know you are you, but the world looks at the mask and says, no, you are this.
And for a long time, psychiatry and society told these people that the mask was the reality.
Yes.
And the person inside was the one who's confused. Like it is all in your head. In the dismissive sense, like snap out of it.
Precisely. But the science we are about to discuss flips that entirely on its head. It suggests that if it is in your head, it is because it is literally built into the architecture of your brain.
The I is the biological reality.
And the body is just packaging.
Faulty packaging in these cases.
Exactly.
So let's transition from these subjective feelings, which, skeptics can easily dismiss, to the objective, dissected brain structures. Let's get the scalpel out, metaphorically speaking.
Metaphorically.
We're going to look for this grain of rice. Where exactly are we going in the brain to find it?
We're heading to the basement. The hypothalamus.
The hypothalamus. This is the old school part of the brain.
Very old school. It is often called the reptilian brain.
Okay.
It sits deep in the center underneath the massive cerebral cortex where you do your taxes and write poetry and all that high-level stuff.
So it is the engine room.
The engine room is a great way to put it. It controls hunger, thirst, temperature regulation.
Yeah.
And crucial for our discussion today, it is in charge of sexual behavior.
The source material had a pretty colorful quote about this function, actually.
Yeah, it did. It said, next time you get moist or erect, remember to thank your hypothalamus.
Noted. Thank you, hypothalamus.
Exactly.
So deep inside this reptilian center, there is a specific structure we need to talk about. It's called the BSTC.
Right. The full technical name is the central subdivision of the bed nucleus of the serrata terminalis.
Wow.
Yeah, it is a mouthful. But on the streets, or at least on the streets where neurobiologists hang out, it is known simply as the BST nucleus.
And just to reiterate the visual scale here, because I think it's so important for you listening to visualize this, this is the structure that is about the size of a grain of rice.
Correct. It is tiny. But in the brain, size does not always equal power.
Right. Connectivity equals power.
Exactly. And this little node is a major traffic hub.
Okay, so we have this rice grain in the brain. What does it look like in different people? Because this is where the male versus female standard comes into play.
This is where the intuition versus anatomy debate gets physical. In typical biological males, the BST nucleus is about 50% bigger than it is in biological females.
50%, that seems huge. I mean, in biological terms, a 50% difference in a brain structure is usually the difference between species, isn't it?
It is a massive difference. It is what we call sexual dimorphism. The source uses a great analogy here to keep it straight. Men are long grain rice and women are short grain rice.
Okay, long grain for men, short grain for women. But I have to play devil's advocate here, because I know you listening are probably thinking it.
Go for it.
Men are generally physically larger than women. Is this size difference just because men have bigger heads?
That is the first question any good scientist would ask, but no. The researchers corrected for brain weight.
Okay.
Yeah, even if you have a small man and a large woman, the man's BSTC is statistically likely to be significantly larger. It is a sex-specific structure, not a body size artifact.
And just to clarify, because we are going to get into sexual orientation later, does being gay change this? Like, if a man is gay, is his BST smaller?
No. And that is a critical distinction we absolutely have to make right now. The source is very clear on this.
Okay.
If you are male, your BST is usually the long grain size, regardless of whether you are gay or straight.
So sexual orientation does not seem to impact the size of this specific structure.
Not at all. It is about gender identity, who you are, not who you sleep with.
Got it. Okay, so we have a baseline. Men have a big BST. Women have a small BST. Enter D.F. Swab. Who is he?
D.F. Swab is a heavyweight researcher from the Graduate School of Neuroscience in Amsterdam. He conducted a landmark study at the Netherlands Institute for Brain Research that really cracked this whole thing open. He decided to look at the brains of male to female transsexuals.
So these are individuals who were born with male bodies, physically male, with XY chromosomes, but who felt often since childhood that they were female.
Correct. Swab managed to secure the brains of 11 of these individuals after they passed away.
Which is incredible.
And just to pause on that, getting that kind of specific tissue sample is a logistical nightmare, and scientifically it is incredibly rare.
Right, because you need the donor history, you need the preservation. It is a goldmine of data.
Absolute goldmine.
So remember the mass theory we talked about earlier? Outwardly, these 11 people were male. So based on traditional biology, you would expect them to have the long-grain, male-sized BST nucleus.
Exactly. They had the testosterone history, the chromosome. You would fully expect the male structure.
But that is not what Swab found.
No. When he looked at the BST nuclei of these male-to-female transsexuals under the microscope, he found that they were the same size as biological females.
Wow.
They were short grain.
So even though every other part of their body developed as male, their bones, their muscles, their other organs, this one specific control center in the brain developed as female.
Yes. The brain structure matched their internal identity, not their external anatomy.
But wait, I have to be the skeptic again.
Please do.
Couldn't that just be a side effect? Because most transsexual individuals take hormones, right, like estrogen.
Yes, they do.
Could that shrink the brain, like chemically alter it over time?
Swab was way ahead of you on that one. That is exactly what the critics jumped on immediately. So he ran controls.
Okay.
He looked at men who had high estrogen levels for other medical reasons.
Oh, like prostate cancer treatments, maybe.
Exactly, things like that. He also looked at the effects of hormone blockers.
Hmm.
And the researchers noted specifically that the size of the BSTC was not influenced by sex hormones in adulthood.
So you cannot just shrink it by taking a pill.
No. And it wasn't about sexual orientation either, as we established. It appears to be a fundamental structural difference.
The implication of that is just staggering.
It really is. For these individuals, this specific brain structure is female. It was likely formed that way before they were even born.
This brings us right back to that mask analogy. If your brain, the part of you that actually perceives reality and controls behavior, is structured as female, But your body is male? The body really is just a costume that does not fit.
Precisely. It validates the experience entirely. It says you aren't imagining this.
But Schwab called this finding the tip of the iceberg, didn't he?
He did.
Why, just the tip.
Because the brain is a vast network. He suspects that the BSTC is just the first component found in a much larger network of cells and fibers.
So there's more to find.
Much more. We haven't mapped the whole territory yet, but we have found the capital city, so to speak.
The source material has this fantastic metaphor for it. It compares the BSTC to the island of England ruling the globe during the British Empire.
It is a really powerful image. Think about the British Empire at its height. England is a tiny, rainy island. Geographically compared to Africa or India or North America, it is a speck.
But it wrote the laws.
It dictated the language, the culture, the trade, and the administration of vast continents.
So similarly, the BSTC is a tiny empire in the brain.
Exactly. It is microscopic compared to the rest of the body. But it rules your sexuality and your identity.
As far as the hypothalamus is concerned, if that BSTC is female, the person is a woman regardless of anatomy, penis or no penis.
That is the biological bottom line Schwab's research points to.
That is such a validating scientific finding. It completely shifts the conversation from psychology to biology. But now we have to complicate things a little bit.
Oh, we definitely do.
We've talked about gender identity, feeling male or female. Now we need to look at sexual orientation, who you are attracted to, because the brain structures there are different.
Right. They are neighbors in the brain, but they are entirely different circuits.
Which brings us to part 2 of our deep dive, the locus of virility.
The locus of virility.
It sounds like a bad romance novel title, honestly.
It really does. But we are moving from the BSTC to another acronym now, INAH3.
INAH3. Is this another grain of rice?
Even smaller, actually. We are talking about a structure that is roughly 1 millimeter in diameter.
1 millimeter. Like a grain of sand.
A grain of sand is a very good visual. Or a grain of sugar. It is distinct from the BSTC, but it's also located down in the hypothalamus.
And what is its job?
The text describes it as regulating male typical sex behavior.
Male typical sex behavior.
Right. In animal studies, if you mess with this area in males, they stop pursuing females. It is the drive center.
And just like with the BSTC, there is a standard size difference here between men and women.
A huge one. In heterosexual men, the INAH3 is on average 2 to 3 times bigger than it is in females.
2 to 3 times bigger. That is an even bigger gap than the 50% we saw with the BSTC.
It is a very clear sexual dimorphism, big in straight men and tiny in women.
This brings us to Dr. Simon LeVay.
Simon LeVay, yes. He is a neurobiologist at the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California.
And the source notes a very crucial detail about him. He is a gay man himself.
Which adds an incredibly interesting layer to his motivation. He isn't just looking at a specimen in a lab, he is looking for answers about himself.
Absolutely. And this was in 1991. You have to remember the historical context here.
Social context.
This was the height of the AIDS crisis. The political tension around homosexuality was quite literally lethal.
It was a terrifying time, and LeVay became what the source calls a reluctant celebrity overnight because of what he found.
So he compared this INAH3 structure in different groups, straight men versus gay men.
Correct. And the findings were explosive. LeVay found that the INAH3 in homosexual men is, on average, the same size as a female's.
So if you look at this locus of virility, a gay man's brain looks like a woman's brain.
In that particular part, yes. And LeVay was very explicit about this. He didn't dance around the phrasing.
What did he say?
He is quoted as saying, I am saying that gay men have a woman's own NAH3. They have got a woman's brain in that particular part.
I can only imagine the reaction to this.
Yeah.
We are talking about finding the biological root of homosexuality in 1991. This must have caused an absolute political firestorm.
Firestorm is putting it mildly. The source describes a completely polarized reaction. LeVay received every kind of hate mail and fan mail imaginable.
It is interesting how the exact same piece of scientific data can be weaponized by opposing sides. And before we get into that, I just want to remind you listening that as we report on this political fallout, we are just conveying the historical reactions mentioned in the sources. We are not taking sides here.
Exactly. We were just looking at the fallout. And the fallout was wild. On one hand, you had homophobes who actually loved the study.
Wait, really? They loved it.
Yeah, because they could point to it and say, see, they are defective, their brains are broken, they aren't real men.
That is awful.
But then you had other homophobes, maybe the more religious right faction, who absolutely hated the study.
Because it suggested God made them that way.
Exactly. If it is biological, it isn't a lifestyle choice. It isn't a sin you can just pray away. It challenged their entire moral judgment framework.
And the same exact split happened within the gay community, right?
Yes, it did. Some people in the gay community loved LaVey. They saw this as a massive exoneration.
Proof that it is hardware.
Right. But others hated him. They felt like he was pathologizing them, or that he was a self-hating homosexual trying to find a cure or a cause for his own nature, as if it were a disease or a tumor.
It really shows how charged this field of study is. You cannot just look at a cell under a microscope without the whole world projecting their politics onto it.
No, you really can't.
But I want to dig into the scientific nuance here, because the source material highlights a very important phrase that often gets lost in the headlines: on average.
Yes. This is where the science gets really interesting and moves away from the sensationalism. We have to be critical of the binary here. LaVey found a range of sizes.
So it wasn't like all straight men had huge INAH3s and all gay men had tiny ones.
No, not at all. While the biggest INAH3s were mostly found in straight men and the smallest were mostly in gay men, there was a broad overlap in the middle range.
A broad overlap.
Yeah. If you were to look at a brain with a mid-sized INAH3, you could not definitively tell if that person was gay or straight. It isn't a barcode stamped on their forehead.
This brings up a huge question. If the brain structure exists on a continuum, like a sliding scale of sizes, does that mean sexuality itself is a continuum rather than a binary?
That is the exact implication. We like to categorize things as gay or straight, male or female. We really like our neat little boxes.
But biology rarely deals in absolutes.
Exactly. It deals in curves and spectrums. The criticism of LaVey's finding that there is overlap actually supports the idea that there are gradations of sexual orientation.
It isn't a light switch. It is a dimmer switch.
A dimmer switch is a fantastic analogy, and this leads us to an even bigger question that the source material raises.
Which is?
Why is all this suggestive research coming from the study of male brains?
Yeah, I noticed that too when reading through. We talked about male to female transsexuals, and we talked about gay men. Where is the lesbian data? Where is the female to male data?
The source asks, rather cheekily, are women getting the shaft once again?
It is a very fair question.
But the answer takes us out of the neuroscience lab entirely and drops us into deep time.
Deep time.
To understand why male brains seem to have this structural variety, why they are the ones showing these dramatic shifts, we have to understand the invention of the male sex itself.
This is part 3 of our deep dive.
Yeah.
The evolutionary context. And honestly, this blew my mind. We have to go back way, way back.
We're going back billions of years. The source introduces this concept of the first sex. Ancient females have been around 4 times longer than males.
Put a hard number on that for us.
Males have existed for a little over 1 billion years. Females, they ran the show for about 3 billion years.
So for the vast majority of life on Earth, male wasn't even a concept?
No, it was a world of she.
And to understand how this relates to brain structure and identity today, we have to look at how we develop in the womb. There is a famous biological dictum mentioned in the source. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny.
Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. It is quite a mouthful.
It sounds like a spell from Harry Potter.
It does.
Translate that for us into plain English.
It is basically fancy pants geek speak. Ontogeny is fetal development, how you grow in the womb. Phylogeny is evolutionary history.
Okay.
So the phrase basically means that fetal development replays our evolutionary history.
So as we grow in the womb, we are reenacting the history of life.
Exactly. Fast forward style. Before baby looks human, it looks like a monkey. Before that, it looks like an amphibian. Before that, it has gills and fins. And before that, it looks like a tiny worm. We literally physically transform through our evolutionary past.
And what is the starting point? Before the worm.
At the very beginning of fetal development, every single organism looks like a female.
Every organism starts as female.
Correct. The source puts it very bluntly. It says, God did not fashion woman from man's rib. A primeval sisterhood fashioned males from females' ribosomes.
Okay, let's unpack ribosomes. What are they?
Ribosomes are the molecular engines in every cell. Think of them as the hard hat construction workers of the body.
The construction workers.
Right. They take amino acids and they build organisms one molecule at a time, following the instructions in the DNA.
So these little hard hats are welding proteins together to make our fingernails and our lungs and our brains.
Exactly. And for 3 billion years, these ribosome factories were run entirely by females.
How did they reproduce without males?
Single-cell females cloned themselves. They just split in half. It was an entire world of daughters.
So why change? If cloning works and it worked for 3 billion years, why invent males at all?
Diversity.
Diversity.
Yeah. Cloning is great for stability, But if a disease comes along or the environment changes drastically, it wipes everyone out because everyone is genetically identical. It became highly advantageous to trade genes between individuals. Sex causes diversity.
So the females needed a delivery system for these genes.
That is essentially what a male is biologically speaking in this context. The females invented males to transport genes.
That is wild to think about.
The source describes the evolutionary strategy perfectly. Females instructed the ribosomes to create smaller offspring. These offspring would sacrifice nutrients, they would sacrifice bulk for mobility.
So the male strategy is be small, be fast, be hungry.
And be indiscriminate. The female strategy, on the other hand, is be stationary, be receptive, be equipped with nutrients, and be choosy.
That sounds eerily familiar to modern dating dynamics sometimes.
Well, it is the deep evolutionary blueprint. But here is the crucial connection to our brain discussion. Because females were the original template, all males must be built from female body plans.
Right, you start with the female blueprint, and then you have to modify it.
Exactly. It is a massive construction project, a major renovation. There are thousands of steps involved in turning that original female template into a male. You have to add things, subtract things, grow things, shrink things.
And this is where the variation comes in.
Yes. This is the key insight of the whole deep dive, really. The source argues that not all males take all the steps.
Right.
It isn't a single male button you press. It is a checklist of thousands of modifications.
So you might get the male body modification,
Yeah.
but skip the brain modification.
Exactly. Or you might get the male body modification and the male sex behavior modification in the INAH3, but not the identity modification in the BSTC.
Or any combination in between.
Precisely. And sometimes some females take a step or two in the male direction during their development.
This evolutionary history perfectly explains the continuum we found in the research.
It makes so much sense when you looked at it this way. If maleness is a variation on the original female template, then it stands to reason that sometimes the process is incomplete or goes in a slightly different direction.
It really reframes the whole concept of what is natural. I mean, people often argue that anything outside the strict male-female binary is unnatural. But if you look at the deep history, the binary itself is kind of a late addition.
And a fragile one at that. The female template is robust. It is the default. The male modification is something that has to be actively built and meticulously maintained by the biology.
So let's try to connect all these dots for the listener. We started with a tiny grain of rice in the brain, the BSTC.
Which tells us that for transsexuals, their internal identity structure matches the gender they feel, not the body they were born with.
Then we looked at the INAH3, that little millimeter-sized speck.
Which suggests that sexual orientation, being gay or straight, is also hardwired into the brain, and that gay men share structural similarities with women in that specific area.
And finally, we zoomed way out to the billion-year history of the ribosome factories.
Which tells us why this happens, because we all start as female. And maleness is a constructed variation. We are all part of a massive biological continuum.
It is a really powerful message. The core takeaway here is that the feeling of identity or attraction isn't just a software issue. It isn't a choice you make. It isn't a phase. It is hardware. It is written right into the physical structure of the brain.
It validates the experience of so many people. When someone says, "I was born this way," the science is increasingly saying, "Yes, you were. Here's the map of your hypothalamus to prove it."
And it really challenges us to rethink how we view the self. You know, we like to think we are our thoughts or our souls.
Yeah.
But so much of who we are is dictated by these tiny biological structures deep in the basement of our skulls.
That actually leads me to a final provocative thought for you listening to Mull Over today. We talked a lot about the tiny empire, that piece of the brain the size of a grain of rice.
The BSTC.
Right. Think about this. That tiny speck has the power to completely override the entire rest of the body. You can have the chromosomes, the hormones, the muscles, genitalia of a male. But if that one grain of rice says female, the entire conscious experience of that person is female.
It overrides everything else.
It does. It wins every single time.
Yeah.
So what does that say about the concept of me? Are we our bodies? Or are we just the quiet hum of these tiny neural empires directing the entire show from behind the curtain?
That is slightly terrifying, honestly, but also deeply beautiful. It means that the eye is stronger than the meat it lives in.
In a way, yes. We're ghosts in the machine, but the machine is building the ghost.
Wow. Well, on that existential note, we are going to wrap up this deep dive. It has been an incredible journey from the microscopic to the prehistoric.
Always a pleasure to explore the wiring under the dashboard.
We hope this gave you a new perspective on the biology of us. Thanks for listening. and stay curious.